On today's show, Jabari Smith Jr. and Tari Eason both named to the all-rookie second team this season. Then we also get into Kevin Porter Jr.'s Rockets season review. How did he handle this past season relative to expectations for him coming into the year? How did he perform? What does it look like for his fit moving forward on this Rockets team? Plus, we have one game, one play, and one number that stood out from this past season. All that and more coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
Hey, Houston fans, I am so happy.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, free and available wherever you listen to your podcasts, including YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Now, today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your very first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day. If you're an everydayer, thank you for making Locked On Rockets part of your day, whether it's on the way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you for making LOR part of your day every single day. Joining us now is your weekly co-host, none other than the podfather himself, Rockets Wire editor and host of the Logger Line podcast, Ben DuBose. And Ben, before we get into our Kevin Porter Jr. season review here in just a moment, we got to talk about just the fact that, I guess it's not really surprising news, but Jabari Smith Jr., Tari Eason both being announced as members of the all-rookie second team. Honestly, Ben, I wasn't shocked here, right? There was maybe a slim bit of hope that Jabari might have had enough to make it to the all-rookie first team nomination. I don't think anybody should be upset with both of them being on the all-rookie second team, though, given the slow start to Jabari's year, the fact that he didn't really come on until that final one-third of the season. What was the most shocking thing to me, Ben, was the fact that Tari Eason almost didn't make it onto the second team, barely beating out Andrew Nembhard from the Indiana Pacers by 1 point in the overall point tally list.
Yeah, I think it goes to show you that counting stats still matter. That's where Jabari, even with some of his relative struggles, the fact that he started 79 games and played enough minutes to put up big counting stats at 30 minutes per game, even if you struggle to shoot, you're ultimately going to score a decent amount of points, grab a certain amount of rebounds, and that stuff matters. And ultimately, that's why, even though there was all this Twitter discourse a year ago about Jalen Green versus Herb Jones, at the end of the day, the 30-point scoring streak that Jalen had near the end of the year, that was always going to win the day with a 100-person media panel versus a guy like Herb Jones, whose case was largely built around efficiency and some of the advanced metrics. The reality is that while those are growing in popularity, they're not nearly widespread enough in terms of their adoption into, I suppose, basketball media lexicon to where people are going to blindly go by them, especially for teams that they're not really watching. At the end of the day, they're just checking on box scores, and a guy like Jabari is a bit more likely to pop. So I'm happy that Tari got on the team. I'm a little disappointed that he just made it by 1 point to the second team. But when you think about it, it's a continuation of a trend we've seen for a few years. And I think that's why Jalen did a bit better than expected last year, because he played a lot of minutes to where he had those counting stats. The same for Jabari this year. And Tari is one of those guys where the contributions are there, but they're just not necessarily rewarded in national media voting, especially when they're looking at bad teams that maybe they only truly watch 2 or 3 times per season.
Yeah, congratulations to both Jabari and Tari, and knowing those guys too. Tari barely making it by a sliver, and then Jabari, who probably internally thinks, I should have been all rookie first team, right? Both of those guys will probably use this as a little bit more fuel to their fire going into their sophomore campaigns. And at
the end of the day, we should point out that this is the 3rd straight year that the Rockets have had someone on the all rookie team. Yeah. Jae'Sean Tate was a first teamer in 2021. Jalen Green was a first teamer in 2022, and now you've got 2 second teamers in 2023. So it is nice to have a little bit of outside validation validation for the types of young talents in this rebuild that you've been trying to put together and gradually improve over the last 3 seasons.
No, absolutely, right? The youth, the talent, it's all there, and we'll see what they're able to do with it going into next season. But let's shift gears now to Kevin Porter Jr. here, which is going to be the focus of today's episode, kind of reflecting on his season at large. And this is, KPJ is one of the most polarizing figures amongst Rockets fans, right, Ben? He's, there's fans that absolutely adore and love him and can see no fault in what he does. There's fans that completely are, abhor him and want nothing to do with him anymore. I think that, and I don't want to miscast you, but I feel like you are more so aligned in the middle ground of this, right, where you understand some of Kevin's shortcomings, but then you also are maybe optimistic to what he can do. I feel like at least when you talk about Kevin, that's the kind of perception that I get whenever we've discussed him before. And I've been very vocal on this podcast and other mediums about the fact that I've been very critical of Kevin and what he has or hasn't done throughout his 2 years as the Rockets point guard, but that I've got this little 3 to 5% hope in me that with the right coach, the right guy is going to be able to unlock the best version of Kevin. And I think that expectations wise coming to this past season, I actually don't think he was better when he came back from injury. But I don't think that this season was kind of like the show us season, right? Like show us okay, you had the first year, got all the bumps and bruises out of the way. Last season, you've got, all the rookies are another year older, right? Like show us what you can do this year. And I don't think there was a singular okay, I feel confident now going forward with KPJ as the point guard of this team.
Well, and it's interesting that you mentioned bumps and bruises because one of the warts that he's got to deal with, he's still yet to play more than 61 games in an NBA season through his first 4 years. Yeah. Now, some of that, there's some extenuating circumstances. Year one in Cleveland, they only played 65 games. He did miss 15 of those, but they only played 65 because the Cavs were a bad team. They were not invited to the NBA bubble. That was the COVID year. Year two, of course, he played in the G League for a lot of the year. He didn't start the season in Cleveland. We know the circumstances there. Rockets brought him in the G League for 6 weeks, brought him along slowly. So he only played 26 games. In the last couple of years, he's had a few injuries. Nothing too concerning. It's not like a chronic bad back or a knee that he keeps re-injuring. But at some point, if it continues to happen, you do have to worry about, is his playing style perhaps naturally more conducive to picking up, as you said, bumps and bruises that prevent him from having the type of durability that it takes for him to fully unlock his value. Yeah, in terms of the big picture, I think where I am, sometimes it's very difficult to distinguish between Kevin Porter Jr., the player, and Kevin Porter Jr., the fit. Because Kevin Porter Jr., the player, there's lots to like, especially for a guy who's just 22 years old, year 4. His true shooting percentage took a big jump this year from 53% last year to 56.5%. This season was even better when you look at the back half of his season. There's some clear steps forward, yet he's a 6'6" shooting guard, and so is Jalen Green, who, by the way, is the most important asset in the entire Rockets organization. So in terms of where he fits here, and this is where a lot of the discourse, I feel like, goes off the rails, people sometimes think that you're picking on Kevin when we go too in-depth into some of the, I suppose, the questions of, is he a point guard? Is his defense good enough to be a wing? And all this stuff about how he fits in around Jalen Green. Well, the reality is that in this construct, the way the Rockets have built this rebuild with Jalen and Jabari as the foundation, it's not easy to see exactly where Kevin fits in. So even though he's a good player and he would be a better fit if you could just clearly say Kevin Porter Jr. is the shooting guard, then yeah, it'd be a lot easier to be on board with the flashes he's shown you. And I do think he took a step forward this year in terms of his maturity, some of the off-court issues. I'm sure we'll get into that. But I think where it gets complicated, and this is where I'm in the middle, I like Kevin Porter Jr., the basketball player. I've seen a lot of growth, and I really like the efficiency that picked up. He's definitely one of the better catch-and-shoot guys in the league. What I don't exactly know is how that fits into the long-term rebuilding puzzle around Jalen Green, around Jabari Smith Jr., around Alperen Sengun, and around whoever they draft with their 2023 lottery pick. # pray for Victor.
Coming up, we'll continue unpacking Kevin Porter Jr.'s Rockets season. We'll also take a look at his one game, one play, and one number that stood out to us from this past season. We're going to get there in just one moment. But first, today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Look, buying tickets to go to, a sporting event or a concert or a play, whatever, it shouldn't be stressful, right? You're trying to buy tickets to go out and have a good time. You shouldn't be worrying about how you're going to get them, right? GameTime is the best place to secure your tickets. They've got flash deals on last-minute available tickets, easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. They've got images of the seat view so you know exactly the type of bang that you're getting for your buck. Lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, all these little protections rolled into it so you don't have to stress about tickets anymore. Snag the tickets without the stress with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. And Ben, you brought up a really interesting point there at the end of segment one that I think is honestly great when you're trying to maybe contextualize this whole debate amongst Rockets fans about Kevin Porter Jr., and that is the talent versus the fit angle here, because the talent to me is undeniable, right? That's where, when you watch Kevin play, you see what he's capable of on the floor, right? You see the way that he can generate his own looks, right? He's a very dynamic offensive player. You see the way that he generates offense for other guys when he's locked in and facilitating at a high level and making good decisions on the floor. I think that a couple of the biggest areas for me have been just the inconsistency at times, right? There's been a lot of very up and down play. And to your point, when we do look at that last, stretch of the season, that 19-game sample size that we have to draw from when he came back after his injury, that was a really encouraging sample to be able to look at. But the issue is we've seen stretches like that from Kevin previously, going back to even two years ago, where he'd have a really good stretch of about, 15 to 20 or 25 games. And then, but then you look at the season as a whole and you're like, okay, well, there's a lot of peaks and valleys, ups and downs. And it feels like especially that point guard position on the floor needs to be, I think, that stabilizing presence on the floor. If you have a lot of fluctuations from your point guard play, then I think that inherently just impacts the other five guys on the court, because if your point guard's struggling, then your entire team is going to struggle to initiate their offense and get things going and, set the table and all that stuff that is like some of the responsibilities of that one on the court.
Yeah. And in fairness to Kevin, I do not think in the 2021 offseason that he stormed into Rafael Stone's office and said, make me the point guard. Let's discard John Wall. Some of this was an organizational experiment that came from well above his pay grade. So that's another reason why I have a bit of sympathy for him. Again, I think some people do let their misgivings over his fit, I guess, unfairly cloud their view of Kevin Porter Jr., the player. As an example, I think if you had hypothetically drafted Evan Mobley or Scotty Barnes, someone like that, instead of Jalen Green, all of a sudden we'd be very excited about Kevin Porter Jr., the numbers he's shown to this point about where he might fit in, especially if you could slot him in as your long-term two. Unfortunately, that's not what the Rockets have the option of doing, so the fit is a bit more difficult. And no, I'm not saying they shouldn't have drafted Jalen Green. No, Kevin Porter Jr. was a lottery ticket. They basically got him for free because of the off-court incidents in Cleveland. So no, he's not enough of a priority that you should have drafted based on having Kevin Porter Jr. I'm just pointing that out as context, as sort of an alternate world where things might look a lot better. And in terms of this point guard experiment, no, I don't think he demanded to be the point guard. I think the Rockets organizationally said, look, John Wall is giving us nothing. This is not going to fit with the rebuild and what we want out of these next two seasons, which is sort of, trial and error and just seeing how you use young guys in different ways. And Kevin Porter Jr. had shown enough as a distributor. We know the 50-10 game that he had, where, it was a worthy experiment. And it was a
low risk, high reward play, right?
Yeah. And it wasn't all bad, but it was mixed. And do I see him personally as the point guard of the future? A guy who I think when the Rockets are contending 2 or 3 years from now, or at least we hope they are, that is your starting point guard? Personally, no. I would be surprised. I've always been a bit more sympathetic to him because some of this is not of his doing. Some of this is simply the Rockets saying, hey, this is a rebuilding year. We're going to be bad. We're sort of tanking anyway. Let's just see what happens and run with it. This is a young player that you want to experiment with. This is exactly the type of talent that you want to take a bet on and use them in different ways and see what happens. And it wasn't all bad, but yeah, as you laid out earlier, it certainly wasn't all good either.
And there's something that I think is worth noting here, and this is something that, you know, maybe I took too long to recognize or realize, whatever, and maybe, you know, being a little bit further removed from the season kind of helped me realize this thing is, you know, one of the things that we highlighted this past year was just a lack of accountability, leadership, whatever, for this Rockets team. And I think one of the areas that Kevin was actually sort of crucified at times for this past season, right? The whole, you know, I'm the head honcho, it's my team, I'm the point guard, like that mentality. But the problem is nobody else was stepping up to take that mantle, right? Like, you know, I think maybe people were hoping that Jalen would like step into that role and be like, nah, this is my team. And like, Jalen's also still just in year 2, right? He's incredibly young. You know, maybe he's, you know, still not super comfortable being that like super vocal, direct leader, like all that. And we already know that there were, you know, I think some shortcomings with Steven Silas in that regard, as far as just the leadership for these young guys. So to your point about Kevin being kind of put in this role, it wasn't all on him, right? Him storming Rafael's office. I think that Kevin was put in this position and he accepted the position and thought, you know what, all right, I'm going to make the most of this opportunity. And he embraced the challenge of trying to be the leader for this team. Is Kevin the best equipped guy to be the leader for this team? Probably not. But I think he did the most with it that he could, given the circumstances.
Yeah. And to his credit, at least as far as we know, he did take steps forward in terms of his personal maturity. We know the anger management issues from earlier in his career. We know they resurfaced on New Year's Day 2022 when he stormed out at halftime after the whole incident with Christian Wood, the Rockets-Nuggets game. At least in terms of what's been reported, we have not heard anything of the sort this season. I do think he took a step forward, and that's step 1 as it pertains to being a leader. I do think he got better. People around the team, say what you will about the national perceptions, but people around the team generally speak well of him. We saw Tillman Fertitta at the Ime Udoka press conference a couple of weeks ago talk about how in his 6 years as owner, he's never met a player that he enjoyed conversing with more than Kevin Porter Jr. So again, people in the building do generally speak well of him. I do think that he has tried to make the most of this. And in terms of, I guess, the way that he was set up to fail, at least in some regards, I think back to a conversation I had very early in the 2021 to 2022 season. I was a little bit frustrated at the time that Jalen wasn't getting more on-ball creation reps, which definitely took a big step up this past season. But 2 years ago, when Jalen was a rookie, I was a little disappointed early in the year that he was playing a bit too much off-ball. They didn't seem to be developing him as number 2 overall pick all that quickly. And the case, as it was laid out to me, was that he's not ready for that. And what may seem like you're prioritizing Kevin Porter Jr. too much, at the time he was the guy that was doing most of the on-ball creation. Jalen just simply was not ready. And I think the first half of his rookie season largely showed that. It took until really the second half of Jalen's rookie year before he really adjusted to the NBA level. And the way it was explained to me, Kevin is covering for Jalen, and Jalen is covering for Sengun, because a lot of people wondered, well, you know, can Sengun do what he's doing in these 15 to 18 minutes off the bench if he was a starter? And their contention was, at the time, this is part of the growing process, that he can do this now in large part because it's short bursts against backups. He needs more time to truly be scaled up. And I do think that you can see that story for Sengun. I know this isn't an all-P episode, but look at how he's decreased his propensity for fouling as his NBA career has progressed over the first 2 years. I do think they were right, at least in that regard, with how it took him a little bit of time. And so I'll never forget that conversation. Kevin covering for Jalen and Jalen covering for All P in terms of the usage. And I do think that, especially as the veterans got shipped out, Eric Gordon, Christian Wood, that largely became the story of Kevin Porter Jr. and the rest of the Rockets. Some of the blame we throw onto Kevin is simply because there's no one else on this extraordinarily young basketball team that is ready for that type of responsibility, be it leadership, be it certain on-court reps and style of usage. And so perhaps he was given a bit too much to handle, but it's just on the 2022 to 23 Houston Rockets, who else was going to?
Yeah, and on the note about the, you know, Jalen being brought along a bit more slowly his rookie year, the on-ball reps and stuff, you know, I definitely think Jalen wasn't ready for it right away, but then there was also that, you know, the implications of, you know, the coaching staff not empowering him to do that even in his sophomore year, right? We had, so I think some of that there's, I don't know.
Yeah, it's not a, you know, it's not a cut and dried right versus wrong debate. Yeah, you can still quibble over it. But I just think in general, there were some things that were put on Kevin that it wasn't like Kevin just went on the basketball court saying,
Well,
this is how I'm going to play.
He was the safety valve, is the thing.
Yeah.
He was the safety valve for the players on the court because there wasn't a legitimate veteran safety valve, right? Think about all the possessions that the Rockets would run when Eric was on the floor, and then something, they'd run something and it would fall apart, and then, okay, the ball ends up in Eric's hands. Yep. Okay, he's just going to shoot it or drive it or do what Eric does because he was the safety valve, right? He was the safety net for that group of guys on the floor. When Eric was gone, and once Kevin made it back into the lineup, or especially earlier in the season, if there were possessions where Eric wasn't out there, like there's a tendency that I think Jalen had when he shares the floor with Kevin to, oh crap, I can't get something, can't beat my man, or this play's breaking apart. Okay, I'm just going to pitch it back to Kevin. I'm going to let him do something with it, right? And I think that is a little bit unfair to Kevin to judge him for possessions that kind of fall by the wayside where he just has to try and salvage something out of nothing, which happened far more often than it's probably fair to him to have to deal with. But coming up, we're going to get into our one game, one play, one number from this season for KPJ, as well as our just overall grade for him for this past campaign. We're going to get there in just one moment. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Next game, how about Jimmy Butler? Playoff Jimmy to score more than 26.5 points. What about LeBron James to have more than 7.5 rebounds? How about Kevin Durant to have less than 6.5 assists? Or what about Steph Curry to have more than 3.5 three-pointers made? So what is Prize Picks? It's daily fantasy sports, but how does it work? Basically, you pick 2 to 6 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 25 times back on your money on any entry that you submit. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you watch. That's NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL, PGA. They've got you covered for all the action. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that simple. They're safe. They offer fast withdrawals. Currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. And now, right now, every day during the NBA playoffs, one PrizePicks user will win a chance at becoming a millionaire. But you have to download the app to find out how. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. So don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, Ben, I'll let you tee us off here with the one game that you have teed up that you wanted to mention for KPJ from this past season.
Yeah, so we talked earlier about the issue of fit, and that sort of being the block for KPJ, because at face value, look, 6'6", talented shooting guard. He was drafted in the first round for a reason, even considering the baggage that he had at USC. All of a sudden, he averaged nearly 20 points per game, along with 6 rebounds, 6 assists on 56.5% true shooting percentage that over the last half or more than that of his season was better than that. There's a lot to like. But what you don't know is how he fits in the long-term puzzle, especially around Jalen Green, who happens to play his same position, or at least his same natural position. So I'm going to go with, as far as best game, the Boston win in March, where he had 13 assists to 1 turnover. And if you look at shot attempts, Jalen Green had 29, KPJ had 13. So he showed a willingness to defer. He showed a willingness to not just pass the ball, but pass the ball without turning the ball over. He showed a willingness to defend. They got some key stops in the second half of that game as they took over. And most importantly, they won because, again, if KPJ is going to fit in this long-term puzzle, it's not going to be with what, at least on paper, is his ideal role. He will have to sacrifice. And if you're going to get him to buy into being used perhaps differently than he would like, the easiest way to potentially get him to do that is for the team to win games, because then he feels rewarded. He feels like the sacrifice was worth it. And so for him to have 13 assists to 1 turnover and the Rockets win the game, to me, that's the kind of thing that is just one game, but it's one game against one of the best teams in the NBA that you won. That could be the formula for something bigger down the road.
Yeah, so that was my one game as well, because I was looking back. No, sorry. It's fun going into this blind to see if we both kind of pinpoint the same game, and for a lot of the same reasons that you already pointed out, right? I love that the distribution in this game was very clearly Jalen is going to get all the shots, right? Like there was no, okay, Jalen's getting, 20 and Kevin's at, 17, 18. It wasn't a shared workload.
Jalen was the number one.
Exactly. Jalen was very clearly the number one. And then there was a nice kind of, steady shot diet across all the other guys, right? KJ Martin had 13 attempts. KPJ had 13. Jabari had 11 attempts in that game. Off the bench, Jae'Sean Tate had 10 attempts. So it wasn't, okay, Jalen's option 1, Kevin's option 2, Jabari 3. It was, all right, Jalen is clearly the big gun, and then everybody else is going to have like that steady kind of spread around shot diet. And again, to your point, 13 assists to 1 turnover. KPJ did a great job taking care of the basketball in that game, and the Rockets won against a top-seeded Boston Celtics team. So I think there were a lot of positives to be drawn from that game, and you're absolutely right. The idea of him buying into that facilitator role, if it's translating to wins, it's a lot easier to get guys to buy into whatever you're trying to get them to do, whether it's a specific role or a scheme on offense or an identity on defense. Winning helps cure everything. So seeing, using this game as maybe a blueprint moving forward, I think that's absolutely something you want to, maybe look at for this upcoming season. And I guess it's, kind of funny that it happened against the Boston Celtics of all teams. Shout out to new head coach Ime Udoka. But let's go on to a play that stands out from the season, because I'm going to actually go an untraditional route or a non-traditional route for my play, but I'll let you go first, Ben.
Yeah, for me, it was when KPJ rejected hopefully future teammate James Harden on a step back 3 in the December win over Philadelphia. Because if KPJ is going to fit long term, it's going to have to be at less usage, in my opinion, than what he's had the last couple of years, especially if he's not a point guard. But even if he is a point guard, then he's probably going to be scaled down a bit as Jalen Green continues in his development. And even if he's not the point guard in name, probably takes on progressively more playmaking reps, the same way we've seen Devin Booker the last few years. And God, please let Jalen be even a fraction as good as what we've seen from Devin Booker the last couple of weeks. But I think with KPJ, we talk a lot about, will he accept lower touches on offense? Will he accept, if he's not a point guard, potentially playing in more of a catch and shoot wing role because he's 6'6"? He does have the length and athleticism theoretically. It's just, can he be less ball dominant? Can he move more without the ball? We tend to focus on the offense, and that's part of it. But the defense matters as well, because if he's not going to have the ball in his hands and he's not going to be quite as important to, I suppose, your playmaking philosophy, then beyond just shooting, he needs to be providing you some defensive value as well. And I do think the case for optimism, you could say that somewhat the last couple of years, perhaps the workload for him on offense has been high enough that from time to time he takes defensive possessions off. And I think that happens with anybody that has a high workload, especially when they're young as well. If he's going to take on some type of different role that might fit within that long-term puzzle that we've been discussing alongside Jalen, Jabari, Sengun, and so on and so forth, he's going to have to be better defensively. And while he's not the world's quickest player in terms of how he moves laterally, he doesn't have the same gifts that Jalen does. He's fairly high IQ. He's long. He's athletic. He's at least respectable in terms of his lateral quickness. And I think he does anticipate well. He seems to be at least knowledgeable of other tendencies. And I think that block of James Harden, he knew what Harden's go-to shot was, and he was ready for it. And he returned it right back to sender. So to me, again, it's just one play, but it's one play that shows you the type of thing that, again, it's what you need, exactly what you need to see more of if you want to buy in on Kevin Porter Jr. being part of this long-term fit.
I love that KPJ's got like this. It's not like a super long like highlight reel, but he's got some like a handful of highlights very specifically between him and James Harden, like in one-on-one matchups. Because he had the one his first season with the Rockets where he drove at the end of the year on James Harden, got the and one on him at the rim. Like there's just a handful of like one-on-one moments between him and James Harden. We know that KPJ looks up to Harden as a player, so it's kind of fun to be able to point out those moments.
And, should also point out that later in that game, which the Rockets won, this was on the other end of the court, but he didn't take the bait of a step back 3 when the Rockets were down 1 in the final seconds of regulation. He actually got Joel Embiid on a switch, and of course Embiid can't stay with him, and Porter actually fouled him out of the game, used his quickness to an advantage, took the pounding because, he went right into Joel Embiid's body. You can imagine how that turned out. Now, unfortunately, KPJ only made 1 of the 2 free throws, so it went to double overtime, but because he fouled out Joel Embiid, and I think he knew that Embiid had 5 fouls, the Rockets won easily in double overtime because the Sixers without Embiid and Harden was just back from his injury. They were cooked at that point. So again, that's a totally different side of the ball, but I do think it was a very high IQ game. And it's the kind of thing that gives you hope that maybe as he matures and he gets more wise in his years, that there's something there for the Rockets to build with.
So for me to go a little bit more, non-traditional for the play thing, I want to highlight a moment that we didn't find out about until post game of the Rockets matchup against the Denver Nuggets at the end of the year. And it was, if you remember, so in that game, Josh Christopher was having a fantastic game that night.
Oh, yeah.
And Josh was playing out of his mind, had a really strong second half, and the Rockets, Steven Silas had actually opted to keep Josh Christopher in much longer than he normally would have as per, usual substitution patterns, rotations, all that. And we found out after the game that it was actually Silas had, I guess, checked with Kevin or talked to Kevin about it, about like, hey, like, I was going to put you back in, but like Josh is playing really well. Like, what do you want to, and which spawned this quote from Silas.
Let him ride.
Let him ride. Like that was, it was kind of a meme at the time, and it was kind of funny. And like, I even highlighted at the time, like it was both kind of frustrating that the head coach was like checking with a player, like, hey, are you okay if I like leave you on the bench? But it was also the fact that Kevin was able to identify and point out, hey, my teammate's playing really well right now. Like, let's not mess this up. I think that was a big moment. So like at the time, it was more frustrating because we were really frustrated with where we were at with Steven Silas as the coach. And it was like kind of just another feather in the cap of like, okay, well, this is not the kind of mentality that you want from your coach, right? Where you're like seeking the acceptance of the players to make these decisions, to push these buttons as far as in-game management scenarios are concerned. But when we flip it and look at it from Kevin's perspective, I think that shows a lot of maturity and a lot of growth to be able to identify, hey, my teammate's having a really great time out there on the court. He's helping these guys win. We're winning this game. Let's go with him, right? Like, and it's not like Kevin was having a bad game that night whatsoever. He wound up finishing the game with 20 points, 9 dimes. He had a really solid performance. The efficiency not quite where you want it to be in that night, but overall, I think that like deserves praise for Kevin to be able to identify, hey, because that's what you want out of your point guard, right? That's what you want out of one of the leaders on the team, is to be able to identify who is doing well and help them continue to do well.
100%. As Silas said after the game, that's big time maturity. That's growth. That's being a leader. And that's where, again, I do have some sympathy for KPJ, because I think there's a lot of people who, because they have misgivings about his long-term fit in Houston, latch on to narratives that aren't entirely accurate anymore. Yes, the anger management stuff in the past, it's real. It's going to be something that follows him. It's always going to be a bit of a challenge. But at least in terms of everything that we know and the conversations I've had, he's taken a step forward this year. He hasn't been that guy. And we've seen a lot, to the other extreme, a lot more positive examples, moments like that where you can see him doing things that I don't think he would have done the last couple of years. And so again, he may or may not be a long-term basketball fit, but I do have some sympathy, because I think a lot of people, because of their skepticism, latch on to some of these narratives that are out there based on his days at USC, his days at Cleveland. I'm not going to say that's gone, because when you have that type of issue, it's always in the background. But I do think there was some growth, and it's fair to give KPJ his flowers on that, even if in some respects we're still skeptical as to the long-term fit.
All right, Ben, final one here. Give me your one number that stands out from KPJ this season. I'm wondering if we're going to wind up overlapping here the same way we did on the game, but go for it.
Last 33 games, 60% true shooting. We talked earlier about the bump for the season as a whole from 53 last year to 56.5 this year. Over his final 33 games, which is over half of his season, 60%. Now, he is in year 4. He's about to turn 23 years old. This is a point in which, while not at his prime, he does need to be getting closer. So it's not so much something to celebrate in a way it's expected, because he's at a point in which, again, he should be getting close to his prime. He should be getting better. He's not year 1 or year 2 like Jalen and Jabari. But at the same time, it's nice to actually see that growth, because again, heading into year 5, we can't just keep talking about KPJ as this talented prospect. No, at some point he's got to actually take a step forward and be just a good basketball player, not just someone that we see flashes from. And so I think, again, it's just 33 games. You talked earlier about him being sort of hot and cold and that inconsistency being an issue over his career, but I do think it's a longer stretch of clearly above average efficiency. In fact, for a guard, very, very good efficiency. And it's something that should leave you pretty optimistic going into year 5. Again, what is the exact fit? I don't know, but there is a very talented player in there, an offensive piece that's valuable to the Rockets. Worst case, he should have a lot of value to other teams around the league if you need to trade him in a friendly contract as well. But I just think that number over a sample of greater than 30 games, it's meaningful.
All right. For me, to round us out here, my number is I could say 2.5 and round up. It's 2.45, but it's his assist to turnover ratio over the last 19 games of the season. So basically, we'll round it up. So it's a 2.5 to 1 assist to turnover ratio over those last 19 games. He had a lot of really strong playmaking performances over those final 19 games after returning from injury.
Yep.
Obviously, we highlighted already the 13 assist game against the Boston Celtics. He had, another 13 assist outing against the Spurs. He had a few, different like 9 assist type games. Overall, I really felt like when he came back from injury, 2 things happened. One, he took a lot better care of the basketball and was very locked in and focused on facilitating for his teammates. And there were a couple games over that last 19-game stretch, like the one, I believe, on the road against the Cavaliers, right? A very emotionally charged game, him playing his former team, all that, where he very clearly was not in the right headspace for that game and struggled because of it. But for the most part, by and large, across those 19 games, took better care of the basketball, was looking to create and set up for teammates, and he really pushed the pace was the big part. Is Kevin's like this, at times he plays like a very methodical style, right? Like he likes to slow things down, get in the half court. And that's just not where this Rockets team and their strengths lie, right? When you're so young, you want to get out in transition. You want to run. You really want to push the tempo because that's where you can generate some easier offense using your young, quick legs, the high flying athleticism, all that. And it really felt like literally that very first game back against the Memphis Grizzlies, his first game back in the lineup, he was pushing pace like crazy, getting the ball and just gunning in transition. And it very much felt like he kept that mentality to close out the season. So the assist to turnover ratio is the one that I wanted to highlight.
Yeah, absolutely. I would just say that stretch to close the year, we said it in the Jalen review pod, and I'll say it again here. You could see the ownership that they took after things really bottomed out in the month of February when both of those guys were out, KPJ with the toe, Jalen with the groin, and we saw the blowout losses in OKC. We saw what happened, the road trip that included the 71 from Dame. When they came back that last week of February, first week of March, I thought they were much better overall basketball players. They were just much more savvy. They took more ownership in terms of taking care of the ball, in terms of defending, not having the lapses that they have or have had in the past. I just thought it was a much more mature Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green, and that showed in a more respectable record to close out the season. I respect your choice a lot. I went with the shooting simply because I think the shooting should also mention that over that last 33 games, he shot better than 39% from 3 on high volume. That's 2 straight years now in which he's been elite as a catch and shoot option. I still think long-term, the shooting is more important because if you don't think he's the point guard, then the shooting gives you hope that be it as a wing, as a 6-man, if he accepts a different type of role, that he could be a really viable option in a different capacity. But yeah, the assist to turnover is important too, because in his current role, and we don't know for sure there's going to be someone better entering next season, then yeah, while not perfect, he definitely took a step forward, and kudos to him for that.
43.5% on basically 2 attempts per game from 3 as far as it being a catch and shoot 3-point shooter this season. So again, not quite at the top of the pecking order this year compared to last year, but still some really encouraging numbers for KPJ. Again, whether he is as the point guard moving forward or playing, more of an off-ball role on the wing. All right, Ben, what are you going to grade? Give us your letter grade. We've kind of revisited a lot of KPJ's season across this episode. Give us your letter grade for how you would evaluate KPJ's season.
Yeah, I give him a solid B. I think there's more to prove in terms of consistency, as you said earlier, and I would say defensive focus. That's going to be something for him that, regardless of the role, is something that he's going to need to do better to truly get minutes and be a focal point for Ime Udoka in particular, given what we know of his priorities. But I think the true shooting percentages, those don't lie. The step forward that he took in terms of his efficiency, that can't be overlooked. And so even if there are questions about his fit, to evaluate Kevin Porter Jr., the basketball player, I give him a solid B. I think it was a solid year. You do need him to be on the floor more as well. We talked about some of his injury knocks here and there, but as far as KPJ, the basketball player, putting aside the long-term fit questions, I think he had a solid year.
If you had asked me at some point, near the end of the season, while all the frustration was still fresh on my mind, I might have been a bit more harsh on the grade. So maybe it's a good thing that I've had a little bit of this buffer zone to step away from the season, maybe look at things from that 10,000 foot view. I'm going to be a little bit nicer, I think, with the grade than I probably would have been around that time. I'll say B- for KPJ season. I think there were still some frustrating moments that you saw, and again, maybe he didn't ask to be put in this position of leadership, right? Some of the on the court visible frustration moments throughout the season that we, can kind of have, pointed to and highlighted where, he very clearly had bad body language or wasn't getting back in transition, a lot of those frustrating moments. But at the same time, like you highlighted, some of the advanced metrics, some of the counting stats, all of that are really encouraging. And now that the Rockets have what I think to be, and what we both think to be, the right voice for this locker room, for this group of young guys in Ime Udoka, it's about molding and refining what is very clearly a lot of raw, unrefined basketball talent and hopefully turning that into what can be a winning basketball player. So I think I'm right there with you. Evaluating KPJ, just the basketball player, right? I give him a straight B- for this season with cautious optimism that Udoka is going to be able to unlock a better version of him moving forward.
Step one, attend the press conference.
There you go, right? Step one, attend the press conference. On that note, Ben, you know the drill. Let everybody know where to track you down at.
Yep, Ben DuBose on Twitter, the Rockets Wire on Twitter, the Logger Line on Twitter, and rocketswire.usatoday.com for all of your daily Houston Rockets news coverage.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked on Rockets. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts. That's Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app, free and available on all podcast platforms. We're also available on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search Locked on Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Drop us your grade for Kevin Porter Jr. this past season. How do you think KPJ handled himself this past year? Let us know in the YouTube comments. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked on Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.